They dig without words. Only the sound of shovels striking damp soil fills the night. The grave yawns wider, darker, as if reluctant to give up what lies below. Torchlight flickers on their faces, casting long shadows that shiver with each breath. The fog thickens, not drifting but rising from the earth itself. Something shifts in the loosened dirt, not seen fully, but felt. The edge of weathered wood slick with moisture, a shape emerging from the soil, too straight, too deliberate to be stone. One man pauses, a torch goes out. The others burn lower, their flames bending toward the pit. No one meets another's eyes. They grip their tools tighter. The silence grows heavier. It is no longer just night they fear, but what might still listen beneath them. There is a fear buried in the soil of what we now call Romania. A fear older than kings, older than the cross, older than the written word. It clings to the Carpathian mountains, soaked into stone and memory. This is not the fear of death. It is the fear of what does not stay dead. Not all who are buried remain still, and not all who die choose to rest. Something stirs when the ground is cold and the rites are incomplete. Something known but never named aloud. This is not the vampire from stories, not a nobleman in velvet, not a beast with wings. This is older, closer, hungrier. It wears the face of someone you knew. It speaks with a voice you trusted, but something behind the eyes is wrong. It does not come from a castle. It comes from your own ground, from your own home. This is not a legend to them. It is memory. This is the world of the Strigoi. Long before this land was called Romania, it was a world of mountains, forests, and silence. No borders existed, no kingdoms ruled, no churches watched from hilltops. The Dacians lived close to the earth, guided by seasons, stars, and instinct. They built no temples, only wooden homes and fire-lit altars. Their stories traveled by wind, passed mouth to mouth, never written down. They believed the world was full of things unseen, spirits, signs, and consequences. What lived in the trees was not just animal. What stirred after death was not always gone. Fear wasn't spoken aloud, but it shaped their days. Because here, the line between the living and the dead was never clear. The Carpathian Mountains were more than landscape. They were alive in Dacian memory, watchful, ancient, and unmoved. Storms lingered here longer than reason. Animals vanished without tracks. Trees bent against winds no one else could feel. The people built their homes low to the ground, as if to hide from the peaks. Each valley held its own version of the same fear. A wrongness in the earth, a weight in the air, a silence that lasted too long. They did not ask what it was. They simply lived in its shadow. The Dacians did not have written myths. Their beliefs were held in memory, carried in whispers, guarded by firelight. Children listened while pretending to sleep. Elders spoke with care, measuring every word. They warned of things that came at night, not with roars or wings, but with footsteps and breath. No one named it directly. To speak of it was to invite it. Instead, they watched for signs, animals acting strangely, a sudden cold in a closed room, eyes that looked familiar but didn't move the right way. In this land, death was not seen as an ending. The body may rest, but the spirit could linger, drift, or even return. They believed some souls were heavier than others. Some left quietly, others did not. A sudden death could leave the spirit confused. A violent death could leave it angry, and if the proper balance wasn't kept, that spirit could come home, not to comfort, but to harm. It could wear the shape it once had and move through doorways it no longer should. The Dacians feared wolves, winter, and hunger, but above all, they feared what could return from the grave. Not a beast, not a demon, something that looked like them, that remembered their homes, that watched them sleep. It didn't knock. It crossed the threshold like it still belonged. And when it did, nothing was ever quite right again. The forests surrounding their homes were thick, dark, and full of sound. Branches cracked when there was no wind. Birds fell silent without reason. Some said the trees could listen. Others said they remembered. Travelers avoided certain groves even in daylight. Paths changed shape. Footprints disappeared. And when someone went missing, people did not search after sunset. The forest was not just wilderness. It was boundary between this world and something older. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a people unlike any he had known. The Dacians, he said, were fearless in battle, but their courage came from belief, not strength. At the heart of their faith was a figure named Zalmoxis. To outsiders, he was a strange god. To the Dacians, he was a prophet, a teacher, and a guide beyond death. They believed no one truly died. The body might fall, but the soul would travel to Zalmoxis and continue. This was not rest. It was existence, loud, eternal, and close. For them, death was not something to fear, but that belief made the veil between the living and the dead thinner, easier to cross, easier to forget where the boundary once was. Every 5 years, the Dacians sent a message to their god. One man was chosen from the village. He was given their hopes, their prayers, their fears. Then he was thrown, alive, onto 3 sharpened spears. If he died quickly, it meant Zalmoxis had accepted the message. If he lived, he was cursed. Another man would be chosen in his place. To modernize, this seems brutal, but to them it was devotion. It proved their faith in the world beyond, and it revealed something darker, that death could be summoned, directed, controlled, a belief that would not disappear. Even after Zalmoxis was forgotten, that door between worlds remained open. High in the Carpathians, silence is not peaceful. It presses in on the ears. It stretches long enough to feel unnatural. The wind moves, but carries no sound. The Dacians believed some places were never meant to be touched. Caves that breathed, ridges where no animal lived. They marked these spots with stones or wooden tokens and avoided them completely, not because they were sacred, but because they weren't empty, just quiet. Too quiet. The oldest villagers remembered events they would not describe, faces that changed after death, livestock that refused to go near a certain door, footprints in frost leading back to the graveyard. These memories were passed as warnings, not to provoke fear, but to preserve order, to keep the boundary intact. They taught the young what to notice, what not to ignore, and above all, what must never be disturbed. Because they believed once something crossed back over, it never truly left again. No one charted the pattern, but everyone knew it. A death with no explanation, a sudden illness in the house next door, a sense of dread that spread like smoke. It never happened in summer, always in the cold seasons when the ground was hard and the nights long. The villagers didn't speak directly of it, but they prepared, by instinct, by memory, by fear. Because if the signs repeated, they believed it wasn't over, that something had slipped through. Time passed, empires rose, religions spread. But in the most isolated parts of the land, the old fear remained. It was not taught in books. It was remembered in silence. Children learned it without being told. Eyes lingered on graves longer than necessary. Doors were locked without reason. And in some houses, a place at the table was never touched, not for love, but for caution, because the line between death and return had never been erased, only watched. In the old world of the Romanian countryside, it was believed that the border between the living and the dead was thin, porous, and that a person's fate could be sealed not by the life they lived, but by the strange circumstances of their birth. To be born in a certain way was to be marked, set apart from the very beginning. One of the most feared signs was the caul, a thin veil of skin covering the newborn's face. Midwives were taught to remove it carefully and without comment, but afterward, it was never discarded casually. Some burned it. Others buried it beneath thresholds far from light. The child might grow up normal, even beloved, but the memory of that veil never left the room. To the elders, it meant the child had already touched something beyond this world, and when death came, they feared it might find the way back. Not every sign was visible at birth. Sometimes it revealed itself only through numbers, through quiet patterns feared more than wounds. When a family welcomed a seventh child of the same gender, the air in the home changed. It was not joy that followed, but dread, for it was believed that the seventh son was born with a second soul, often in the form of an animal spirit. Something wild, something restless. This other soul was said to whisper in dreams, to stir in times of silence, to never fully belong to the living. If the child died young or without proper rites, that second soul could pull them back, not as they were, but as something drained of warmth, drawn to family not by love, but by an unfinished bond. A Strigoi with two faces, one remembered, one feared. Some signs had nothing to do with the child's body at all. They were written in the sky. A birth that took place during a lunar eclipse or beneath a blood-red moon was considered dangerous. Midwives remembered these nights for years, sometimes decades. The child might grow up healthy, even loved, but the village would never forget when they were born. A moon darkened by shadow was believed to stain the soul, leaving it restless, incomplete. Some said these children were dream walkers. Others said they never fully belonged to this world, and if death came early, without warning or ritual, their souls might not know where to go. Not fully living, not fully gone. They would return not with rage, but confusion. And confusion, the villagers feared, was just as dangerous, because a Strigoi doesn't always come with teeth. Sometimes it comes with sorrow. In isolated villages, the midwife held a place between healer and guardian. She was the first to welcome life and the last to touch it when something went wrong. She knew what to look for, not just signs of danger, but signs of the unnatural. A birth under the wrong moon, a tooth where none should be, a silence that came too early. She carried more than tools. Her basket held iron nails, knotted string, bone charms, and salt. Not for healing, but for protection. Because if a Strigoi was born, not made, she was the only one who might stop it. She might burn the call, salt the windows, or mark the child in secret. No one questioned her, but everyone watched her hands. And when something went wrong in the village, it was often the midwife they looked to first, for knowledge or for blame. Not all Strigoi rise from graves. Some walk among the living from the very beginning. These are the Strigoi view, the living Strigoi. People believed to be born with something unnatural inside them. They could grow, speak, marry, and age like anyone else. But things around them never stayed still. Fires flickered when they passed. Milk soured too quickly. Animals grew restless. Infants cried. Bread refused to rise. No one would accuse them outright, but eyes would follow them through the market. Doors would shut sooner when they walked by. They weren't monsters. Not yet. But villagers believed that if death came without ritual, what lived beneath their skin might finally rise, and it would come back, wearing a face everyone knew. Once a person was suspected of being Strigoi view, no amount of kindness could erase the fear. They might attend church, offer bread to neighbors, speak softly to children. But none of it mattered. The village would still watch. Misfortune no longer meant chance. A stillborn lamb, a rotted well, a fever that spread too fast. Eyes would turn toward the marked one. Families began to whisper during meals. Neighbors made excuses not to visit. Children were pulled back from doorways. Milk and salt were left at thresholds, not as gifts, but as warnings. Because even if they were still alive, the villagers believed something else lived with them. And when that body finally gave in to death, they feared the spirit inside wouldn't leave quietly. For the ones born marked, death was not the end. It was a door that had to be sealed shut, properly, forcefully. The villagers believed there were ways to stop a Strigoi before it rose. Iron placed beneath the tongue, a needle driven through the heart, binding the feet with ash-soaked twine. These weren't acts of cruelty. They were protections for the living and for the soul. Because if the body was left untouched, if it was buried casually or late, then what slumbered beneath the skin could slip free. The dead might return not as themselves, but as something hollow, hungry, and familiar. And the ones they'd loved most would be the first to feel it. Even with precautions, the fear lingered. Villagers would check graves days after burial, searching for disturbed soil. Dreams became warnings. A shadow at the window. A knock that came too late at night. Some said the Strigoi appeared first in sleep, whispering to the living, calling them by name. Old women tied red thread to their doors. Fathers hung knives over cradles. If a fire sputtered or a mirror cracked, suspicion grew, not just of the dead, but of the living who might be next. Because once a soul was marked, the curse did not always end with one generation. Some bloodlines never stopped running cold. These beliefs were not superstition to them. They were memory, preserved in firelight and repetition. Each generation was taught to look for signs, to listen for quiet changes, to remember that even birth could be a warning. They whispered of those who were different from the start, who felt older than they should, whose names brought silence to a room. In these villages, it was better to be forgettable, to be born on a dull morning with no storms, no signs, no veils, no teeth, because once a person was marked, even love could not protect them. And when they died, the villagers would watch the grave more than once. Among the ancestral beliefs passed through generations, death was not seen as a final departure. It was a crossing, but not all who crossed stayed beyond the veil. Some left peacefully, their passage eased by prayers and rites, but others died suddenly, violently, or without the proper rituals. These were the dangerous deaths, the ones that left something behind. A soul could become lost, trapped near its body, confused or angry. And when that spirit slipped back into the flesh, the dead would walk again. These were not tales to frighten children, they were warnings. For those who returned in this way were called Strigoi mort, not born cursed, but shaped by a death gone wrong. Where peace failed, something older and darker took root. When a child died before baptism, the grief was sharpened by fear. Without the sacred water, the soul was considered unclaimed, still tied to the world of the living. It was said their spirit wandered, confused and cold, seeking warmth it never received in life. Villagers believed these little ones could return as Strigoi, not out of malice, but longing. Their presence came in quiet ways, milk spoiling, cradles rocking on their own, a mother's breath suddenly halting in sleep. The pain of loss was heavy, but the dread of return was heavier still. Baptism was not just salvation, it was protection. Without it, even innocence could be dangerous. These souls, pure but restless, hovered between two worlds. And sometimes they came back through the wrong one. Those who took their own life were buried in silence, often outside consecrated ground. To the villagers, suicide was not just despair, it was a soul rejecting its own path. They believed these spirits could not find peace, forever trapped at the edge of both worlds. Their return was feared more than most. The signs were subtle at first: mirrors cracking, wells drying, the sound of weeping with no source. These were restless dead, ashamed, angry, or desperate to be remembered. And when they returned, it was said they brought sickness that spread like guilt. No one spoke of them by name, but everyone remembered where they were buried and never walked too close. A life taken in violence was a soul left unfinished. When the killer remained free, the spirit's pain echoed through the soil. The villagers believed the murdered could not rest until balance was restored. And in that limbo, they could return, driven not by blood, but by justice, twisted into hunger. It began with illness in the killer's family. Cattle stillborn, bread that turned black in the oven. The spirit's rage grew cold and quiet, then unbearable. If no justice came from the living, the dead would take it themselves, and they would wear the face they wore in life, until they were seen. Those who lived apart from the village, herbalists, heretics, feared women, were never trusted in death. even if their bodies cooled like anyone else's. The suspicion remained. Their graves were watched and sometimes disturbed. It was believed that someone cursed in life might carry that curse beyond the grave, and if wronged, they could return not to haunt, but to punish. A harvest ruined after their passing. Children waking with bruises that faded before dawn. No one admitted to fearing them, but salt was scattered at the threshold, nails were driven into wood, and eyes stayed open a little longer at night. The dead needed more than a grave. They needed ritual, prayers, salt, coins for the journey. A body buried without these was not at peace. It might linger, confused, clinging to its old life, or worse, rise, still hungry for what it had lost. Villagers were careful. Coins under the tongue, rosemary in the hands, a priest at the threshold. But in times of plague, war, or haste, mistakes were made. Graves dug too shallow, names never spoken. And when that happened, the ground did not stay quiet. When someone died without warning, healthy at dawn, gone by dusk, whispers filled the village. Sudden death was unnatural. It suggested imbalance, a soul yanked from its path. In some cases, it was blamed on jealousy, curses, or bad omens. But more often, it was feared the person had not truly left, especially if the sky was strange, if animals howled at the grave, or if their reflection lingered in mirrors days after. Something had gone wrong, and when something goes wrong with the dead, it never stays buried. The living watched the grave. They knew what to look for. Fresh soil that sank too quickly, a coffin that sounded hollow, or worse, scratches on the inside of the lid. Some even said blood had welled up from the earth, as if the body was still trying to breathe. These were not stories to scare children. They were warnings, passed down in fear. Because if the signs appeared, the dead had not accepted death, and the villagers knew what had to be done before it was too late. The Strigoi did not wander without purpose. It always returned to those it knew. A wife sickens first. A brother stops speaking. A child cries in sleep and wakes with a bruise no one can explain. Love, once shared, now becomes a tether. Grief becomes the doorway. The Strigoi fed not just on blood, but on connection. It was said the closer the bond in life, the stronger the pull in death. And so families watched each other with quiet dread, afraid of what might come back wearing a face they once trusted. They watched, they waited, but when the signs became undeniable, a name would be whispered. The name of someone buried too quickly, too quietly, or under suspicion. And once spoken, that name changed everything. It was no longer just grief, it was danger. They called them Strigoi mort, the dead who refused to stay dead. A reckoning followed. The grave was opened, the truth was uncovered, and the hunt began, not for justice, but for silence. Because once named, the Strigoi must be stopped. It begins not with terror, but with something far more dangerous. Longing, The Strigoi does not rise to torment strangers. It comes back to the ones it loved. A breath against the window. A slow creak on the stair where none have walked in years. The warmth of someone sitting beside you in the dark. The scent of earth, of pine smoke, of something half remembered. These are not tricks of grief. They are invitations. The dead remember the path home, and they return gently, at first. The floorboards groan beneath a weight you cannot see. A child hears their name spoken softly in the night. A widow feels the bed shift beside her. And though the house is cold, the presence is not. It lingers like a memory, sweet and heavy. Because what haunts first is not malice. It is love that would not let go, and it knocks before it enters. Not all who return bring malice. Some are drawn back by love too fierce to rest. She died before the frost melted, her child still swaddled, eyes unopened. There was no priest, no coin, no bell, only cold soil, and the hurried prayers of those too afraid to linger. But love, unspoken and unfinished, does not stay buried. The cradle began to rock at strange hours. The infant cooed at empty space, smiled at shadows that shifted too smoothly. Milk soured moments after being poured. One morning, the baby lay swaddled in fresh linen, warm, clean, untouched by any hand in the house. The room smelled of soil, dried lavender, and something faintly sweet. The midwife burned herbs by the hearth and said no word. Some ties, she whispered, are stronger than death, and a mother's arms may still reach out, long after they should have stilled. Not all hauntings come for the helpless. Some return for promises left unfinished. She waited each dusk where the path met the trees, just past the old fence line. They had buried him quickly. No coin for the tongue, no priest for the blessing. The river had taken his body, but not her longing. It began with the scent of wet soil at her shutters, then a knock, faint but regular, always just after sundown. Her lantern trembled each time, and in the mud outside her window, footprints, bare, human, fresh. Neighbors told her not to speak his name, but she swore she saw him standing beneath the tree where he first kissed her. He said nothing. His eyes were pale. His mouth never moved. And still she stepped toward him, because some returns are harder to refuse, especially the ones that once held you close. What begins in love does not always stay there. The Strigoi does not drain strangers first. It turns inward, toward the ones it remembers. The mother who came to soothe begins to linger too long near the crib. The lover, once silent beneath the tree, now watches through windows with open hunger. Illness moves quietly through homes once full of mourning. The youngest grows pale. The oldest stops eating. A brother wakes drenched in sweat, eyes wide, speaking names that no one says aloud. The candle burns low. The bread will not rise. The air is thick and heavy, as if grief itself has teeth. They say it feeds first on those it loved in life, because hunger, like sorrow, knows exactly where to return. And the closest hearts are the ones left open longest. They say you'll feel it before you see it. A weight on your chest like a sleeping cat, or something larger. A breath that isn't yours, moist and cold against your cheek. At first, you think it's just the grief pressing down again. But then you open your eyes, and someone is there. A face you knew, but not as it was. The skin too pale, the eyes too distant, the mouth half open, as though waiting to speak or feed. You cannot move. You cannot scream. You can only lie still, heart racing, and remember when they were warm. What visits your bedside is not a stranger. It is love, hollowed out. It is memory with teeth. And when it leaves, it does not go empty. After the visit, the house is not the same. Milk sours within minutes. Bread cracks at the center, hollow. The mirror fogs when no breath touches it. Chickens go silent. The black dog hides beneath the table. The floor creaks at the same hour each night, even when no one is awake. A rusted nail falls from the door frame. A needle left on the table twists slightly in place. These are not accidents. They are warnings. The house speaks in subtle signs, in quiet rearrangements of the ordinary, but not everyone listens. Some say it's grief. Some say it's madness. But the elders know better. They count the changes, and they wait for the knock that always comes last. Not every family wants the dead to stay buried. Some deny what's returned. They say it's just the wind or sorrow playing tricks on tired minds. They sweep away footprints. They cover mirrors with cloth. They explain away the cold that gathers in the corners. Others go further. They light candles, whisper names, place bread by the window. Because the one who returns is not a monster to them. It is their child, their husband, their sister. And even when illness spreads, they shield the grave. They bar the door when others come with shovels and salt. They call it love. But sometimes it is the love that keeps the Strigoi strong. Sometimes the living feed the dead without knowing they do. There always comes a night when silence cannot hold the truth. The child coughs blood. The cows refuse the barn. The dog will not stop howling. The wind carries voices no one wants to hear, and someone finally speaks the name aloud. The neighbors arrive with torches and iron. They carry salt, prayers, and dread. They do not come to ask questions. They come to end what was not truly buried. The grave is opened, the body is marked, the mouth is red, the heart still damp. They burn what was once kissed, because the visits have become feedings, and love has turned into dread. What returns must be stopped before the house goes cold forever. There is a moment when fear stops whispering and begins to dig, when grief becomes suspicion, and suspicion turns to action. In the early 18th century, across Eastern Europe, death did not stay buried. Children wasted away. Mothers heard voices calling through shut windows. One grave always led to another. The villagers knew what it meant. They called it the Strigoi. At first it was done in secret, at night, with candles and silence. Graves disturbed, bodies examined, hearts pierced or cut, mouths filled with stones. But soon, fear spread faster than silence could contain it. Village after village took up the torch and the spade. From Wallachia to Transylvania, the dead were no longer trusted to lie still, and what began as belief became action, swift, brutal, and shared. The vampire panic had begun. For the villagers, this was not a desecration. It was a sacred duty to protect the living. So they turned to the only authority they trusted, their priest. He had baptized their children, buried their dead. They begged him to come to the grave, to bless the tools, to say the words, to give peace to the soul and strength to the hands that would dig. But the priest was torn. He had grown up with the same fears. He knew the signs. But the church demanded doctrine. To the bishops in the cities, this was paganism, superstition. They ordered calm, not candles. Prayer, not the spade. So when the priest refused, the people were left alone, abandoned by the church, driven by terror. They had no choice. They would act without him. Word of the events did not stay in the village. In Kisolova, Serbia, a man named Petar was seen after death. 9 more died. His widow swore he came to her bedside. The imperial officer Frombald was called to witness. He watched as the body was exhumed. He recorded the swollen chest, the blood at the mouth, the groan as the stake pierced the heart. Frombald's report was dry, clinical, but it was undeniable. This was not legend, it was documentation. He sent it to Vienna, and the empire read with disbelief. What the peasants knew had now been written in the language of power, and once it was written, it could not be ignored. A few years later, another story gripped the empire. Arnold Paula, a soldier, confessed before death that he had once been attacked by a vampire. To protect himself, he ate dirt from the grave and smeared himself with blood. But he died weeks later, and then more deaths followed. The villagers said Paule had returned. They dug up his body. It was uncorrupted, its mouth wet with blood. They staked it, burned it. But fear did not stop. Years later, people still died. They blamed the cattle. Powell had fed on them too. Anyone who ate the meat, they said, had been cursed. Now the vampire had multiplied, and the fear had evolved. The panic could no longer be dismissed. So Vienna sent a team of doctors, led by surgeon Johannes Fluckinger. They arrived in Medvedja. They opened 13 graves. They found corpses red-faced, bloated, eyes wide open, hearts full of blood. Some even groaned when pierced. Fluckinger recorded it all. No embellishment, no folklore, only facts. His report was signed by imperial surgeons, stamped, filed, distributed. The Strigoi had now passed from legend into medicine, and the corpse, once whispered about in candlelight, now stood dissected in the light of the Enlightenment. Europe was watching. Voltaire mocked it. Clergymen debated it. Skeptics wrote pamphlets. But the story had escaped the village. It was now in salons and courtrooms. The vampire had become fashionable. A creature from the muddy roads of Romania had made it to velvet drawing rooms in France, and yet the truth remained buried deeper. These were not tales told for amusement. They were documents, eyewitness accounts, signed and sealed by surgeons, priests, and governors. The Strigoi was now evidence, and belief, once quiet, now shouted in Latin, French, and German. The panic had become history, but fear had become immortal. But even with science watching, the villagers still had one problem. How do you find the guilty grave? When many had died, suspicion was not enough. So they turned to an older authority, nature. A pure black or white horse, unmarked by other colors, would be led through the graveyard. A boy would ride it, often young, virginal, untouched by death. They passed grave after grave, until one moment the horse froze. It reared, refused to go further. Its hooves dug in, its eyes wide. It had found something. The villagers nodded in silence. The beast had done its part. Now came theirs. They stood at the edge of the grave, holding their breath as though the earth itself might hear. A single nod from the elder. Then the crowbar sank into the seam of the coffin. The wood resisted, swollen with age and weight. It cracked open with a groan, long, low, almost human. A sudden wave of air rose from within, warm, metallic. The smell was not of death, but of something rich and wrong. A few villagers turned away, covering their mouths. It was the scent of blood, old but not dry. Inside lay the corpse, but it did not look dead. The skin was dark red, as though flushed with fever. The lips were full, still wet, stained at the corners with a deep dried crimson. A line of blood had run from the mouth, down across the chin, and into the shredded cloth beneath. The shroud itself was torn, bitten from the inside, the fabric curled and frayed at the edges. Its eyes were half-lidded, glassy, yet fixed in a direction that made no sense, staring above and behind them. Some said they twitched, others said they watched. The hands were curled into fists, the nails overgrown and blackened, hooked like claws. Beneath the fingers, caked dirt clung to the skin, not from burial, but from movement. Hair had thickened and lengthened, falling in greasy ropes around the shoulders. A thin beard had sprouted on the cheeks like a man's still growing. The stomach had not collapsed, the skin had not slackened, no maggots stirred, no bones showed. There was no soft rot, only firmness, fullness. The heart, some said, was still whole. Some even whispered it beat. Silence returned. Only the wind stirred the trees beyond the graveyard wall. One woman dropped her torch. A boy began to cry, but was quickly hushed. The elder backed away without a word. No one needed to name what they had seen. It was not a body. Not anymore. Not truly. It had slept, yes, but not in peace. This was no longer the man they had buried. This was something else. Something that had waited beneath them, warm and full, with its mouth still wet. They had found the Strigoi. No one spoke, not even the elder. The coffin lay open, and with it, the truth. There was no need to debate, only to act. The villagers moved with grim purpose. Each had brought something. Salt in coarse grains poured in a slow circle around the grave. Iron nails, rusted and sharp, were pressed into the body's chest, one for every death they blamed on it. A black candle was lit and placed beside the heart. Its smoke curled upward, then bent, drawn unnaturally toward the corpse. Ash came last. Sacred ash from fires used only for death, never for cooking. Collected in silence, stored in secret. The elder scattered it with shaking hands. He whispered no prayer, only the old words, spoken not to God, but to whatever waited below. These were not church rites. They were older, handed down like recipes, done not in hope, but in defense. The villagers stood back. The circle was sealed. The tools were ready. The killing would come next. But this was the preparation, the boundary between fear and finality. And somewhere beyond the firelight, the wind stopped, as if even it were waiting. The ash settles over the open grave, clinging to the damp earth like a final breath. The black candle burns low, its flame twitching in the cold wind. No one speaks. The silence stretches, thick, unnatural, long enough to break a man's courage. Then the chosen one steps forward. In one hand, the hammer. In the other, the stake, long sharpened and heavy with meaning. Its material is not chosen by chance. It must be ash, hawthorn, or wild rose. Woods feared across generations, believed to wound not only flesh, but the spirit within. The stake is more than a weapon. It is a seal. It must pin the corpse to the earth, binding it to stillness, while forcing the tormented soul to release its grip. No words are spoken. No blessing is offered. Only breath. Only resolve. The villagers draw closer, eyes fixed on the corpse. They say it must be done in a single blow. Clean, true, straight through the heart. To miss is to invite something worse. He kneels, raises the hammer, and strikes. The body shudders. A sound escapes. Not a scream, but a groan, wet and low, like something deep breaking. Then stillness. But no one breathes. Not yet. In some villages, the stake alone was never enough to be certain. They began with the head. Decapitation, swift and final, done with the edge of a shovel. They believed this severed the spirit from its vessel, breaking the last tie to the world of the living. The head was buried far from the body, or placed between the feet to prevent reunion. Then the heart was removed, split cleanly in two, half burned, half buried in salt at a crossroads, a place where spirits lose their way. Garlic was packed into the corpse's mouth to silence curses and cries. Sometimes the body was turned face down, so if it rose, it would dig deeper into the earth. But even that was not enough. The body had to burn, not in anger, in fear. Only fire could finish what death could not. They built the pyre from fruitless wood soaked in oil. A match flared. The flames rose quickly, too quickly. Some say the body moved. Others heard a sound high and broken. But no one turned away. They watched until there was nothing left. No bone, no tooth, no trace. Only ash, only silence. And perhaps, at last, peace. Even now the danger lingers. The villagers know what others do not. That evil can sleep in fragments, so the remains must be scattered, divided with purpose. A portion is buried at a crossroads where spirits lose their way. Another is thrown into running water, carried far from any living soul. The rest is sealed in a clay vessel, wrapped in cloth, and hidden deep in the woods. No marker, no name, only silence. The village elder makes the final cut, breaking a twig from a cursed tree. He buries it in the shape of a cross atop the hidden vessel. This, they say, confuses the spirit, breaks its memory, severs its path back to the world of the living. because some believe that even ash can dream. And dreaming, it may one day remember who it was and try to return. The danger is not only in the grave, it lingers in the blood, in the veins of those left behind. The Strigoi may be ash now, but its hunger touched the living, and something must be done to restore what it took. So the afflicted family gathers in silence. No priest presides, only the elder, the one who remembers the old ways. A small cut is made on each wrist, just below the palm, just enough to draw blood. It drips into a wooden bowl filled with spring water, salt, and 3 crushed herbs, wormwood, thyme, and nettle. The elder stirs it with a branch of wild hawthorn, 3 times sunwise. Then each family member drinks, bitter, sharp, heavy with meaning. This is not a cure, this is a statement to the dead, to the world, to the blood itself. You no longer belong to the grave. Some cry, some tremble. Others stare at the ground as if listening for footsteps, but no one refuses. No one ever refuses. The grave is sealed, the ashes scattered, the blood rebalanced, but the villagers know it may not be enough. The dead have ways of slipping back, and so the home must be made ready, a fortress, not of walls, but of symbols. At the threshold, a strip of red wool is tied from post to post. Frayed at the ends, it flutters in the wind. Above it, a horseshoe is nailed in silence, its iron edge catching the light. At each doorframe, a pinch of salt is pressed into the corners. A full ring is poured across the threshold, unbroken. The windows are marked with soot from the ritual fire, dark smudges like watching eyes. Inside, they do not rest. Garlic is placed beneath each bed. A sickle lies under the pillow of the youngest child. An iron blade is set at the foot of the cradle, handle toward the door. The hearth is swept thrice widdershins, and no bread is baked that night. They eat nothing warm. The home must feel empty to the hungry spirit, cold, unwelcoming. These are not charms for fortune or health. They are warnings to the unseen, to the wind, to anything that might be listening. The fire has burned out. The tools have been buried. Not a word is spoken as the last shovel smooths the earth. No stone is placed. No cross is carved. Only the wind marks the grave now, brushing dust across the mound. The villagers return home slowly, each step heavier than the last. No songs are sung. No toasts are made. The doors close early that night, and the shutters are drawn tight. Inside, clothing worn at the ritual is burned in the hearth. The floor is scrubbed. The water is thrown outside, far from the house. The bowl used in the blood rite is shattered and buried. They will not speak of what they saw, not today, perhaps not ever, but still they feel it. A coldness where warmth should be. A silence that stretches too long. The crying child quiets in its sleep, but the mother stays awake, listening. In the days that follow, the sickness fades. The milk returns. The fields sprout green again. But no one tends the far corner of the graveyard. They walk the long way around it. They cross themselves when a dog howls at night. And above all, they do not speak the name, not of the man, not of the thing, not of what they burned, not out of guilt, but because some names are not meant to echo. Some names draw breath, even from beneath the earth. The grave is not the end. The signs disappear. The body is destroyed. The prayers are spoken. And still, something remains. A room colder than it should be. A chair no one dares move. A silence that does not comfort but oppresses. The villagers say nothing, but they know. Some houses breathe strangely, long after the last cry. Children grow up knowing which door not to open. They trace red thread without asking why. They feel it in the way the grown never speak of one name, because fear, once planted, does not die. It lingers, in walls, in blood, in gestures too old to forget. Even when the Strigoi is gone, its shadow lingers like bruised skin beneath the surface. It does not scream. It watches and waits. Children of haunted homes are not told stories. They are raised inside the silence. They learn gestures, salt under cradles, iron near windows, red thread around wrists, not as rituals, but as habits. No one explains them. They simply are. Questions about cold rooms or locked attics are met with silence or prayer. The children know which drawer not to open, which relative not to mention. And when the dog growls at the empty hallway, they look away too. Even when they leave the village, these gestures follow them. They light candles without thinking. They flinch at certain dreams, because fear, once taught in silence, becomes instinct. It does not need a name. It lives in blood. It sleeps in memory. And when passed down through generations, it no longer asks to be believed, only obeyed. Some homes do not forget. The hearth is rebuilt, the shutters replaced, but the warmth never returns. Milk sours too soon. Bread won't rise. Children cry at shadows in empty rooms. The walls groan as if remembering something buried inside them. Neighbors say the place is cursed, but not allowed. They walk faster past it in daylight and never look at it by night. Those who move in leave quickly, never giving a reason. They speak of restless sleep, of rooms that breathe. Villagers speak of heavy corners where light dies and air turns thick. No matter how many prayers are spoken, no warmth ever stays, because the Strigoi leaves behind more than death. It leaves places hollowed, not abandoned, but inhabited by something deeper. Not every haunting ends with the grave. Some live on in the child born after, a child who won't sleep through the night, who draws things no one taught them, who knows to stay away from certain places. The villagers call it the blood. They speak softly when that child passes. They burn herbs near doorways. Doctors find nothing. Priests offer no comfort. The elders simply nod. They've seen it before. These children are watched, not allowed near graveyards, not given mirrors. Some are warned. Some are sent away in fear that the curse can be cut from the line. But blood remembers what the mind cannot. It carries more than illness. It carries memory. And memory, when dark enough, is a door. Some remember too well. They survive the haunting, but do not let it fade. They become the watchers. Moving quietly among the homes, they speak little and sleep lightly. They trace the old paths. They leave charms at certain thresholds. They never sit with their back to the dark. Others call them strange, half here, half gone, unmoored from the daily rhythm. But watchers do not seek peace. They are the ones who hold the threshold. When the ground stirs, they feel it first. When memory dims, they sharpen it with salt and nail. They are not elders, not mystics, just villagers who have seen too much and chose not to look away. Because what is forgotten does not remain still, and what sleeps beneath the silence is only waiting to rise.